What are some not safe for work history facts that do not get taught in schools? Every year, it was the pharaoh's solemn duty to go to the banks of the Nile, disrobe, and fap. A great many other men would follow him, and when the pharaoh was done, they too would bash one out on the banks. Further, it was believed that the pharaoh had to be sure that as great an amount of his gentleman's relish as possible landed in the river itself rather than on the land in order to guarantee a good future harvest. Peter the Great scoured the Russian Empire in a search of dwarfs and giants in an effort to breed a race of each. While he couldn't find enough giants, he found many dwarfs. He would bake a huge pie and have a dwarf get naked and wait inside it to jump out and scare guests. In addition to using them as regular stewards and servants and such. That was the tip of Peter's crazy. Royal family members had people witness them having Shreks so they could confirm the legitimacy of the heir. Back in the day, pre-revolutionary times or so, one of the only things that women in the English colonies were allowed to have expertise on was the female body reproductive system. Occasionally, a case would come up in court that required the inspection of a woman's body. Usually it would be to determine if she had been raped or otherwise had Shreks out of wedlock. To handle these sorts of cases, the court would convene a jury of women from a nearby town to perform the inspection and report their findings. In one particular case though, a married woman was petitioning for the annulment of her marriage on the basis that her husband was impotent. To test these claims, the court convened a jury of women tasked solely with attempting to bring the woman's husband to erection. The article didn't mention the result of this case, but this remains one of very few cases that a jury of women was convened in a court of law for any purpose besides their expertise in women's bodies. John F. Kennedy was dating Miss Denmark in the 1940s, and when they stayed at Sumter House in Charleston, the FBI booked their room because they thought she may be a Nazi spy. Turns out they didn't hear a lot of conversation, but instead a lot of not safe for work time. Tapes are in the Library of Congress for those interested. John Harvey Kellogg, one of the Kellogg brothers who invented breakfast cereal, advocated for sewing silver wire through boys' foreskin to prevent them from fapping. Strange fellow. When Marie Antoinette was imprisoned by the French citizens, they took her kids. Then they had her oldest son raped by prostitutes so that he would contract their STDs. They then tried to use this as grounds to try her for abusing her children. The accusations went nowhere. So the poor kid was given a ton of venereal diseases for nothing. The dresses and corsets worn by women in the court of King Louis XIV were so cumbersome and difficult to get out of that women would often take a dump in the hallways of the Versailles Palace during grand balls. The morning after, the corners of hallway in the palace would have piles of shoes stacked up that the servants would have to clean up. French President Felix Faure died getting a blowjob from his mistress. I'm going to take everything I read in this thread as fact. Benjamin Franklin published an essay entitled Fart Proudly, a tongue-in-cheek treatise promoting the health benefits of farting and how to make farts smell better, in 1781 while he was the US ambassador in France. I wish this thread had its own sub. I would read it every day. Thomas Granger was the first juvenile to be executed in what would become the USA. He was convicted of buggery with a mare, a cow, 2 goats, several sheep, 2 calves, and a turkey, and hung in September 1642. The first use of legalized prostitution in the United States was in Nashville, TN, after it was occupied by the Union Army. Rates of STDs dramatically decreased after the new regulations were implemented. Pancho Villa and his buddies would go through cities and they would kidnap the cute ladies, and they would never be seen again. In preparation for this, the ladies would go to the mud and appear to be very filthy so they wouldn't be taken away. They took my grandmother's aunt. In addition to all the other hijinks Columbus got up to, in later years, he ran a Shrek slave business from the New World. He remarked in a letter to a friend that 9-year-old girls were a particularly hot item with the nobility of Europe. Egyptians also had a priestess called the god's wife whose job was to perform Shrek's acts on a statue of a deity. The US government did some pretty messed up experiments on their own soldiers using chemical weapons and drugs like LSD at a facility called Edgewood. There's a documentary on it called Bad Trip to Edgewood, which includes a recording of a soldier doing an obstacle course on PCP. George Washington was a total poonhound. He once got transferred to a remote base because all the other officers' wives wanted to bone him. In early Japan, high-class Japanese often had boys men on the side they would use for pleasure. It wasn't seen as gay or wrong, because that concept hadn't been imported from the West yet. They were considered a mistress and were usually well taken care of. Lyndon Johnson was known for pulling out his pecker during meetings. The Welsh would often go to England to steal sheep. This was punishable by death, so when they were caught they would say that they went there to frick the sheep, which was not punishable by death. Johnny Appleseed didn't go around planting apple seeds just because. He sold the trees to settlers and they used the apples to make booze. Tasty apples are a mutation, and apples trees used to make edible apples don't come from seeds. They come from grafting other tasty apple trees. I'm stealing this because it was so good. Apparently, during the writing of the Declaration, Ben Franklin would sneak off at lunch. Someone would always have to go fetch him and they would always find him in the middle of a room surrounded by naked women. Anne Frank's diary talked a lot about fapping, but most of it was edited out. The US had a eugenics program into the 70s that sterilized thousands of women, mostly black poor. They would often do this under the guise of an emergency appendectomy post-birth. A woman gave birth to a rape baby and didn't know why she could never have children after. She was able to receive damages. Look up Buck v. Bell. King Louis XIV, the Sun King, is responsible for high heels. He thought they made his ass look great. At Andrew Jackson's funeral, his pet parrot was removed because he would not stop cursing. Empress Theodora of the Byzantine Empire was a hooker and came to power by hooking up with the emperor of the time. I actually didn't know until recently, but the core of Discovery only ate meat and had incredible constipation. One day they all ate pills they named thunderclappers, which made them shoot out everything immediately. But the pills had a bit of metal in them, so if you go out on the same trail as the core of Discovery with a metal detector, you can find the exact place Lewis, Clark and the rest of the core took the biggest shoots of their leaves. JFK cheated on his wife and was a super Shrek's addict. Dude fricked a lot of women, even saying if doesn't have Shreks 3 times a day he gets headaches. FDR's children actively tried to get him laid. They found him mistresses to frick. Savannah Garr was only saved from Sherman's march to the sea because a former mistress of his lived in the city. She came to him begging for him to spare the city. She stayed the night. So yay. I'd say that was the greatest use of the power of the pussy in American history. When Edgar Allan Poe was 27, he married his 13-year-old cousin. When the First Fleet brought the first convicts to start the colony that became Sydney, Australia, the men and women convicts were segregated on different ships. When they were put ashore after months at sea, it started a party that took the guards 2 days to stop. The story that caused me to get my degree in history. I guess I learned from my English teacher while we were reading Hamlet today that nuns would run the brothels to get their money for the church, where they scolded affairs. Kind of interesting. Your history teacher will probably not mention that Ben Franklin had a thing for older women. Total cougar hunter. Your history teacher will also probably not mention that Ben Franklin was totally right. A lot of our advances in online video streaming was thanks to the peen industry. There was an American Nazi party prior to World War II that tried to stage a cut on the US government. Confessional booths were built by the church not for privacy, but to prevent priests from having Shreks with young women and men. Catherine the Great had a secret Shrek salon full of furniture decorated with dongs, spread-eagled legs, and female mouths giving head. all tastefully embellished with a gold leaf. Gandhi conducted bizarre chastity experiments during which young boys and girls bathed and slept with each other, but were punished for any sexual activity or talk. In Ireland during the Iron Age, the inauguration ceremony of a new leader involved the king to be publicly engaging in copulation with a white mare, which was eaten. Peter the Great had a thing for midgets. He would keep them around for entertainment, and if the mood struck him he'd kill them in bizarre ways, such as putting a billow up their ass and pumping them full of air until they died. When he got married, he forced 2 midgets to get married in a ceremony that mirrored his own. He brought in midgets from all across Russia to be the guests, and then he and his friends laughed and made fun of them the entire time. During reception they forced them to drink copious amounts of alcohol. Some of them even died from drinking. They made them do crazy stuff during the reception, and if my memory serves me correctly, the bride and groom had to consummate the marriage in front of Peter while he laughed and humiliated them. Maya Angelou worked as a Shrek's worker, nightclub dancer and performer as a young adult. A college history professor I had told us that Martin Luther came up with the idea of salvation through faith alone when, while spending an entire day in prayer, he got a boner in church. He thought, well frick me, if I can sin while deep in meditative prayer, maybe no one can avoid sin, and the only thing saving us is our belief. I haven't been able to verify this on my own, however, so either I haven't found it yet or he was just bullshitting us. He was a very good professor otherwise, so I tend to believe him. The pyramids were constructed without hard hats or safety harnesses. They even delivered the stone used without properly aligning their circle of safety with cones. The ancient Greeks were super gay. I mean really mega super gay. Buzz Aldrin was the first person to pee on the moon. According to dog lore, he now owns it.